Hello year 8s and welcome back to mathematics. Unfortunately, I'm in a bit of a predicament where I'm actually stuck home for this next week, so I'm actually going to be trying to teach you guys through a set of videos online as like the following. Through each of the lessons, you'll be watching a bit of a video which goes through the next part of the booklet, and also in the next booklet as well, which will be handed out to you shortly. And hopefully this will be helpful for you as you guys are watching. There'll be times during these videos where you'll be able to pause, or the teacher will be able to pause the video for you to have a go at a few questions. So please do that so you are able to have a go at the practice questions as well. So let's continue on with what we started off last lesson. Now, last lesson, we started trying to find the rule of a linear relationship. So we wanted to identify the rule of a linear relationship, and we got started on halfway through this. In particular, a few things to note. We talked about how all linear relationships can be written as y is equal to mx plus b. This is a way that we write all an algebraic way to write all linear rules. So rules where you can draw in a straight line. And in particular, what we need to find was we need to find two numbers. We need to find m, this number here, and b, the number at the end. And the way that we did this was with where we found this coefficient and the constant. So here, these are the steps that we copied down last lesson. Now, if you haven't gotten this copied down or you're in your booklet, please do that for me. But what we did last lesson was we went through to find the coefficient of x, m. The m number is how much y increases each time we go across in the table. So we'll go through the example we did last lesson as well again, and also do another example as well. So the first thing we find is the coefficient of x, and we call this m. And the second thing is we find a thing called the constant. So we first find the coefficient of x, and then we find the constant. Now this constant is found when we find on the table where x is equal to 0. So let's actually have a go at the examples that we looked at last lesson, and also another example so we get a bit of an idea of how we do this. Now in your booklet, some of you may have already gotten this first example down. That's great. I'm just going to go through this example again, just so that we are clear with the steps that we need to do. So when we are looking at a table of values like this, the first thing we want to find is the coefficient of x. Now the coefficient of x is just what number we go up or down by each time when we go across the table, across by 1 in each x value. So for example, if you have a look here, all my x values, they go up by 1 each time. Notice, -2 to 1, -1, we're going up by 1, we're going up by 1, we're going up by 1, we're going up by 1. That's great. That's the first thing we need to check, that we're just actually going up by 1. We're not actually using 1. After we've done that check, what we then do is we look at the y numbers. And we go, okay, what are we adding by each time to get from the next number? So here, if I'm going from -8 to -5, what do I need to do? Well, to get from -8 to -5, I need to add 3. And same thing here. If I'm going from -5 to -2, what do I need to do? I'm going to add 3 again. And same thing, if I'm going from -2 to 1, I'm going to add 3. And the final thing, if I'm going from 1 to 4, I add 3. Notice that's the same number each time. So here, for this first example A, the coefficient of x, or this value of m, is just going to be this +3. And we're just going to write here 3 for that. Okay, so that's the first thing we check. We find the coefficient of x, we look at the table, we see how much are we adding to each value of y value to get to the next one. Then the second thing we need to do is we need to find a value for b, the constant. Now the constant is just the y value when x is equal to 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to look in this first row. I'm going to have a look for where x is equal to 0. And hopefully you can see, as we pointed out last lesson, that x is equal to 0 in this third column here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to circle this third column just so I can see that. Notice here, x is equal to 0. And so my value for the constant is actually just the y value underneath. For this particular case, the value for b is just -2. So I'm going to write here, b is just -2. And all I need to do, once I've done that, is I'm going to just replace these values into my rule, y is equal to mx plus b. And so I'm just going to replace m with 3 and b with -2. So let's do that. So here underneath I'm going to write, this is just equal to 3x plus -2. And we would be done at this point. Now here's the thing, mathematicians don't like writing this plus and the minus thing, so I'm just going to write this as 3x minus 2. And so this is my final answer for this first example. Y is equal to 3x plus 2. So we notice that the first thing is, we notice that each time I go across in the y values, over here, I add 3 each time. And so that's why my value for my coefficient of x, m, is 3. And then if I look at the value for where x is equal to 0, this third column over here, y is equal to negative 2. And so my value for b, or the constant, is negative 2. And so I write that as y is equal to mx plus b, y is equal to negative 3x minus 2. Okay, so that's our first example. Let's have a look at the next example, b. Now b is a little bit trickier. We can still do the same steps. First thing, we just check, have a look at the x values. What are we doing to each x value? So to get from 3 to 4, we add 1, which is good. 4 to 5, we add 1, which is good. 5 to 6, we add 1, which is good. 6 to 7, we add 1, which is good. So that actually works out well for us. Now that we've done that, we're going to have a look at the y values. So in the second row, how do I get from each number to the next number, to the number in the box next to it? So let's have a look at this one. 5 to negative 5 to negative 7. Now this is where you actually need to remember your number line. So if you remember your number line, 0 is over here. And if I find where negative 5 is, negative 5 would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Negative 5 is over here. Now, if I wanted to get from 5 to negative 7, well, negative 7 is negative 6, negative 7 over here. What do I need to do? Well, on my number line, I would be going to the left twice. So I'd be going 1, 2. Now, if you are going to the left on your number line, are you going to be adding or are you going to be subtracting? Well, when we go left on a number line, we are actually subtracting. So here, what we are actually doing is we're not adding 2, we are subtracting 2. Oh, let me try to write that again. We're subtracting 2. Okay, so if I subtract 2 to get from 5 to negative 7, what do I do to get from 7 to negative 9? Well, negative 9 is another 2 to the left. 1, 2. Negative 9's over here. And so here, 1, 2. That's another minus 2. And hopefully you can see, as we go to each box in the following one, negative 9 to negative 11, we are subtracting 2. And negative 11 to negative 13, we are subtracting 2 again. There we go. Okay, so for the first one, m, the value of my coefficient of x, that's going to be negative 2. Because I'm going minusing 2 to get from each number to the following number after it. Okay, so that was for my coefficient of x, m. Now the other thing I need to find is my constant term, b. Now b, what I said in the previous one was that b is the y value when x is equal to 0. That happened to be in the third column. Now if you have a look in the third column of this table, the x value is actually 5. That doesn't work out for us. We need to find where the x value is equal to 0. There's a bit of a problem, isn't there? If you have a look at my table, can you see that none of these values is 0? We can actually do something to deal with this though. We can actually extend the table so that we can include 0. Now, if you have a look at my numbers, I've got 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 in my x values. What I can do is I can actually extend the table on the left-hand side. I'm going to draw up my table. I'm going to just add on a few more columns here. So I'm going to draw on my table of values. I'm going to put 3 here, 2, 1, and 0 here. I'm going to actually extend the table on the left-hand side. Now we know that when x is equal to 3, this first column tells me that y is equal to negative 5. Well, what I need to do is I actually need to figure out what number would go in this spot over here. Now notice, actually I'll add on another row just so we can see this. Notice, if for me to go from 5 to negative 7, I need to actually minus 2. Now if I go backwards the other direction, well, what number would be in this box here where 2 is? Well, what I need to do is I need to find a number where if I minus 2 from it, I would get to negative 5. What number does that happen to be? Well, if I look at my number line, that number would be the one over here, because if I minus 2 from that number, let me just erase these so we can see it a little bit clearer. 1, 2, I would get to 5. What number goes there? Well, in that spot, we would have a minus 3, because minus 3, we minus 1 will get me to minus 4, and then minus 1 again, which will give me to minus 5. So here, this is actually going to be minus 3. And we can continue this pattern. So then we go back 2 again, so 1, 1, 2. What number would be over here? Well, that would be minus 1. And then if we go back 2 again, well, actually, we'll start going into the positive numbers, and the number that would be over here would be 1. So, well, maybe I'll make that green, 1, and then I go back 2, that would give me minus 1. And so here, when x equals 0, y is equal to 1. And so what this means is that my b value, so b is going to be equal to 1. Okay, so now that I've got all my parts, m and b, all I need to do is write it into my rule. Y is equal to mx plus b. And so for this one, we're going to have, well, we're going to replace m with negative 2, negative 2, x plus 1. And there we go, we found the rule here. Okay, so hopefully this was helpful. Over the page, there's a few questions for you to have a go at. There's question 1 on page 29, and then there's also questions 2 on page 30. Can I get you guys to have a go at these questions for me? So question 1 is going to be very similar to the ones we did in that first example. And in question 2, there'll be a few questions where you need to actually extend the table, whether that be to the right or to the left, so that you can get an x value of 0. So have a go at those questions for me, and we'll come back a little bit later. Okay, so hopefully you're able to have a chance to have a go at those questions. Now what we're going to be doing is actually using those skills that we looked at to finding a rule from a table of values. We're going to have a look at finding a rule from a graph. Now, what we did a couple of lessons ago was we actually used a linear graph we used a table of values to graph a linear relationship. So if you remember from a couple of lessons ago, let me just have a find of it here. We filled in a table of values like this one here, and then we drew it on the graph by plotting the points. Now what we're going to be doing is using a graph like this, going backwards, creating a table of values from it, and then finding the rule of that particular graph. So let's go through the steps for this. So the first thing we're going to do, when we get given a graph and we want to find a rule. So if the question says find the rule of a graph, what we want to do is we first want to identify the points on the graph from left, let me write this in black, left to right. So can I get you guys to fill this in for me? So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to look at our graph and then write down each one of the points identify the points from left to right. What's our first point on the left? What's the second point? Third, fourth, and then fifth. If there's more than that, we can also include it. Then, using these points, we want to construct a table of values. What we want to do is just draw up a table that looks something like this, x and y, and include all our points here. So just remember, each column is one coordinate. So if I had a coordinate of 1, 2, so let me just write here, if I have a coordinate of 1, 2, that I'm going to write in my table of values, well, the x value is our first number, 1, and so I'm going to write here 1 for my x value, and then my y value is 2, and so I'm going to write in, for my y value, 2, like this. And so we fill in our table of values with all of the other coordinates on my graph. Then from there, we find the rule using this table of values constructor. So just like the examples that we did before, we do the exact same things, but we actually do that additional step where we find the table of values first. So let's have a go in an example with this. So underneath, we have example 8. So in example 8, we are going to find the rule of this graph. So here, if you read the question with me, find the rule for this graph by first constructing a table of values, table of xy values, and then write the rule in words. Okay, so let's have a look at this graph. On this graph, we have a straight line. Hopefully you can see it, this straight line over here, that goes like this. On the graph, we have a few points. There's a few points, and hopefully you can see that there's 5 of them there. We've got this first one here, the second one here, the third one here, the fourth one here, and the fifth one here. So they have all these points here on our graph. So what we're going to do is we're going to identify them from left to right and actually fill in a table of values. So I'm actually going to write this a table of values. So I'm going to draw up here. I'm going to write X and Y. I'm going to fill in my table of values with these coordinates. So let's start on the left. The first point is this point down here on the very left. This one here, -1, -3. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put this coordinate into our table of values, and I'm going to put them in the right spot. So let's just remember our coordinates. The first number, that -1, that is our X value or our Y value. Well, if you remember, X comes first, and so that -1 is my X value. So I'm going to write here in the X column, X row, -1. And then if I put in that -1 for my X value, underneath I'm going to put in my -3 for my Y value. And so this is my first coordinate. So this coordinate here is my -1. Oh, maybe I'll put it in red. -1, -3. And so we're going to repeat this for all the other points as well. If we have a look at the next one over here, 0, -2, well, I'm just going to put this in my table again, 0, -2. So 0 is my X value, -2 is my Y value. And so that is my second point on in my table. Then I've got my third one, -1, -1. So I'm going to put here 1, -1. And here we go, here, right there, 1, -1. The third one, 2, 0. So I'm going to write in here 2, 0. And the final one, 3, 1. And I'm going to put this in my table over here. 3, 1. Whoops. And there we go. We've constructed our table of values. Now here, once we've constructed our table of values, we can do the very same thing that we did in the examples before. We can just go through and find our coefficient of X, M, and also our constant, B. So let's have a look at the values here. So the first thing we're going to find is the coefficient of X, that value of M. So we notice that each value of X, I'm going to erase all of these so I can just see it a little bit clearer. Each value of X, it goes up by 1 each time, which is good. We're just checking that first. It goes up by 1 each time. That's great for us. Then what we're going to do is we're going to check the Y values and see how much we need to add to each point to get to the next one. Well, let's have a look here. First one, I have to go from -3 to -2. What do I have to do to get from -3 to -2? Well, you can think of your number line again. So if I have my number line, zeros here, -1, -2, -3. I'm going to put 1, 2, 3 as well. If I'm going from -3 to -2, I'm going up by here. What do I need to do? Well, I need to add 1. So this is going to be add 1. The next thing is I'm going to go from -2 to -1. Once again, I am adding 1. And hopefully we can start to see that each time we go across in my table of values, I am adding 1. Okay, so what does this tell me? Well, that tells me that my value of M is going to be equal to +1 or just 1. There we go. First thing, we've already found our coefficient of our X, this M value. Then what we're going to do is we're going to need to find the value of B. Now B is the value when X is equal to 0. So if you have a look at my table, do I have a value for where X is equal to 0? Well, actually we do. In this second column over here, we have X equals 0. So for this one, what's the Y value? That's just -2. So B is just going to equal to -2. And once we've done that, all we need to do is write this into our rule. So I'm going to write on the side here. So I'm just going to write Y is equal to, and I'm just going to skip the step where I'm going to write mx plus b. Here we go. So it's going to be 1x plus -2. Okay. And there we would normally be done. But here's the thing. I'm going to show you this shortcut. Mathematicians are notoriously lazy. If we don't need to write something, we don't want to write it. So here, if you see 1x, mathematicians, we would just actually skip that and say, oh, actually, 1x, we're just going to write that as an x. If there's an x, it already means that there's one of them there. We don't need to write anything. We don't need to write that one. Now, the other thing I said earlier was if you have a plus and a minus sign like that, we don't need to write the plus sign as well. So we can just write this as x minus 2. So here we go, y is equal to x minus 2. Now the question also asks us to write the rule in words. Now here, if I was to write this rule in words, well, x minus 2 just means we take a number and what do we do with it? We subtract 2. take a number and subtract 2. So x is our number, and what the minus 2 does is that we subtract 2 from it. So that's how we can find a rule from a graph. So let's just quickly recap over the steps. The first thing we want to do is we just want to identify what points we have on our line. Then we draw it up on a table of values. So we fill in a table of values with these points in it. After we've done that, we just find the rule like we did in the previous examples, looking at each coordinate and trying to find the rule, by first finding the value of m, the coefficient of x, and then b, the constant, which is where x is equal to 0. So hopefully that helps, and there's a few questions over the page where you need to do this. In each one of the questions, there's a bit of white space around each one of these graphs. So hopefully you'll be able to find, you'll be able to write down and draw those table of values. There's a few further questions if you are done early, so have a go at those for me, and hopefully you're 8. I'll see you guys in the next lesson. Bye.